From Hezbollah to the Houthis, have Iran's proxies lost all power? It was once feared that a conflict with Iran would engulf the entire region, with allies from Gaza, Lebanon, and Syria to Iraq and Yemen. But with each of Tehran's supported groups struggling or eliminated entirely, has Iran been left alone in its war with Israel? I'm Andrea Sankey, and today's Newsmakers are Iran's allies. In a region often characterized by sectarian division, Iran was seen as a sort of power broker for Shia affiliates and other allies. But over the last few years, those allies and proxies have been arguably decimated through various conflicts. Whether it's Hezbollah weakened by Israeli attacks and assassinations, the Houthis targeted by the U.S. and Saudi, the elimination of Bashar al-Assad in Syria, or Hamas under constant bombardment, Tehran's allies have been hit shockingly hard. So where does the Iranian axis stand now? And where does it leave Iran's leaders in the conflict with Israel? Here's a look.
Explosions rock Tel Aviv. Missile trails above Jerusalem, and on the ground, smoke, fires, and buildings hit. A similar story in Iran too. Buildings destroyed, black smoke on the skyline. 5 days after Israel launched its surprise attack on Iran, there's no sign of de-escalation.
The Israeli Air Force controls the skies of Tehran. This is a change to the entire campaign. We are on the way to achieving our two goals: elimination of the nuclear threat and elimination of the missile threat.
Iran rejects that it's building nuclear weapons, insisting its nuclear program is for civil energy purposes.
These attacks crossed all red lines. Most alarmingly, Israel deliberately targeted a peaceful nuclear facility operating under full IAEA safeguards.
In Canada, half a world away, at the G7 meeting, the US stood by its support of Israel. But the president gave somewhat mixed messages on whether he would or wouldn't intervene. The US is keen to avoid Iran getting its hands on nuclear weapons, and the president wants Iran to return to nuclear negotiations. But he also left his threats open to interpretation.
And what would you say, in your opinion, what would it take for the US to get involved in this conflict militarily?
I don't want to talk about that.
He later posted an ominous tweet after leaving the G7 a day early, suggesting Tehran's residents should immediately evacuate, warning the US would come down so hard on them if they do anything to US citizens. But as Israel's allies speak up, Iran's are conspicuously silent. Iran was once described by the US as the biggest contributor to destabilization and terrorism in the Middle East. But in the wake of Hamas attacks on October 7, 2023, critical Israeli strikes and an invasion of southern Lebanon have seen Iran's proxy forces weakened considerably. Most notably in a series of assassinations using small explosives contained within pager devices used by Hezbollah's commanding elite. Its leader, Hassan Nasrallah, was killed in an airstrike. Lebanon's cabinet discussing on Monday the need for Beirut to keep out of the conflict as the country recovers from the Israeli-Hezbollah war. In December last year, Iranian ally Bashar al-Assad, then president of Syria, was ousted, the disgraced president and his regime falling to rebels as he fled Damascus for Russia. The new Syrian leadership that took over is far less willing to engage with Iran and seeks increasing cooperation and sanctions removal with the West. Militias sympathetic to Iran have been targeted in Iraq, and the Houthis in Yemen, who caused disruption to shipping in the Red Sea, have been targeted by US and Israeli operations. And with Israel's genocide and destruction in Gaza, another Iranian proxy, Hamas, is on its knees. with many of its scientists and military leaders killed, several of its nuclear facilities and air defences destroyed, and allies unable or unwilling to assist. What is left for Iran to do to respond to the Israeli missile attacks?
So what has happened to Iran's allies and proxies? Well, joining me now to debate that and more are from Tehran, Associate Professor of World Politics at the University of Tehran, Fawad Izadi. From Washington, Senior Fellow at the Atlantic Council and former Deputy Assistant Secretary for Counterterrorism at the Department of Homeland Security, Thomas Warwick. And from Chicago, Public Policy Fellow at the American University of Beirut, Rami Khouri. Thanks all so much for being with me. Rami, I'll start with you. If Israel had taken this action against Iran, even 5 years ago, before the fall of Bashar al-Assad, before October 7th, how different do you think the regional and global response would have been?
It's really hard to give a precise, accurate answer. That's very hypothetical, but still we have to give it a stab. It depends a lot on how Iran responds most of all. Iran has a lot of friends and allies and close allies, strategic allies around the region. Some of them have been weakened. Some of them are still active. Their role in the regional dynamics has been widely debated for decades. And we're still learning about Hezbollah and the Nasrallah in Yemen and others. Clearly, they're all weakened. And the U.S. is now militarily in the region and bringing in more aircraft carriers and refueling planes and things like that. So it all depends on what Iran does. If Iran makes a forceful response and has the chance to stop Israel's aggressions all across the regions, then probably other people would jump in.
Okay.
But
I mean, Rami, quickly, you mentioned that they're weakened, these proxies and allies around the region. I mean, not least Hezbollah. Hezbollah had 100,000 fighters or so before. They're not necessarily happy, from many reports we've seen, with Iran not necessarily coming to their defense when they were attacked by Israel. So to see Hezbollah and the state it's in, and that was probably arguably its biggest ally in the region, and with the most anti-Israeli force, what do you make of Hezbollah then? That in itself would seem like Iran is weakened as well.
Yeah, I wouldn't use the word proxy. I know that's used often around the world, but they're very close strategic allies. And Iran's closest ally in the region is the people of the region. And the sentiments of around 800 million people all across the Middle East, Arab countries, Iran, Turkey, others. But you're right, there is a different equation now, and Iran has to figure out what is the role of its close strategic allies. The Ansarullah in Yemen are still shooting off an occasional ballistic missile. Hezbollah probably won't get involved. But you never know. These things take a turn that we can't predict. This is it's an existential battle for all of these groups.
Thomas, I'm not sure you necessarily agreed with especially the earlier part of Rami's analysis. Go ahead.
Yes. So things have very clearly changed in the last 5 years, radically so. The biggest threat that Hezbollah posed to Israel was not the number of fighters, it was the number of precision ballistic missiles. We always used to say that Hamas had the capability of launching rockets to attack Jerusalem. Hezbollah could attack the Knesset. That's how precise its weapons have been over the last 5 years because of Iranian missile technology. All of that is gone. The Israelis, in a campaign over a month, completely wiped out Hezbollah's missile capability. They then started targeting Hezbollah's leadership, killed Hassan Nasrallah, the longtime head of Hezbollah, killed his successor, carried out a series of what, just from a purely technical perspective, one had to call brilliant covert operations to shock Hezbollah's fighters through blowing up pagers and walkie-talkies. all of this had the effect of knocking Hezbollah out of the fight. And so when Israel started contemplating direct military action against Iran's nuclear program, Hezbollah was not going to be able to deter Israel from doing what we've seen over the last week. So that's a very different world from what we were in only a few years ago.
Okay, Fouad, you don't believe that's true?
I'm shocked. We had more than 1,000 civilians killed during the pager operations, terrorist operations. And then we have people in Washington that called it brilliant. This shows the nature of the people we are dealing with. They have no respect for human rights. They have been doing a genocide in Gaza. I guess that is brilliant. And they have been killing civilians in Iran, more than 200 people in the last 5 days. I guess that is brilliant.
But Fouad, it's not so much about whether Israel is, violating international law, violating multiple human rights. It's about whether or not Iran is supported in its position right now. Do you feel Tehran has regional support somehow that can actually make a fundamental difference, or does it even need it?
I think Iran has no other choice but to respond. Iran has friends regionally. We know the policy of not fighting back against Israel has resulted in Israel attacking Iran. So I think from now on, Iran will use all its capacities. There are a lot of people here that are asking for American bases to be attacked because Israelis cannot do this without the support of the United States. This is a joint American-Israeli operation. Having this nice guy foreign policy, having limited response, having sort of go along with what the other side has been doing is not paying off. So I think Iran's policy will change very soon.
Okay. Let me ask Rami, I need to come back to the issue of Lebanon here. There used to be support for Hezbollah, even among non-Shias in the country, because they supported Hezbollah's stance against Israel. That doesn't quite seem to be the case anymore. And when you look at, smaller details, Hezbollah doesn't necessarily post the pictures of the Iranian leaders that it used to post. Qasem Soleimani, for example, you used to see him hanging in the background when certain Hezbollah leaders spoke. That's not the case. So where does Lebanon really stand? How's it changing in its attitude?
Yeah, all of the players are changing, including the United States. And including Israel. Everybody's changing. This is a very dynamic situation. And the reality now is that everybody is gauging the precise capabilities of the Israelis and the Iranians initially. The others may come into play here and there, but the Israelis and the Iranians are the important one. And of course, the United States is there supporting Israel in the background and is probably willing to do more. So I think
But what about Hezbollah in Lebanon?
Yeah, Hezbollah in Lebanon is not the same group it used to be 5 and 10 years ago. It is still a formidable force that is in the process of reorganizing and re-strategizing what its priorities are. It's not going to get involved in military action like it used to be so quickly because the pressure against it in Lebanon is increasing, and the international pressure, especially the United States pressuring the Lebanese government to implement UN resolutions to disarm Hezbollah, but not the U.S. is not putting the same pressure on the Israelis to not occupy the lands it occupies in South Lebanon. So this is the dilemma. You can't measure this conflict in military capabilities. The U.S. and Israel together are the strongest technical military force assembled probably since the Roman Empire.
That's understandable, but I mean, Rami, we know that sometimes these smaller groups can punch way above their weight, and that's what everyone feared. If Israel were to attack Iran, I'm saying again, 5 or so years ago, that these smaller groups would absolutely, take the region, especially Israel, down, because these guerrilla fighters can often, if you want to refer to them as that, can again punch above their weight, and Israel would be in danger. It doesn't seem to be the case anymore.
Yes and no. We don't know. Still, we don't know the exact capabilities what Hezbollah has, and it does certainly still has a lot of missiles and other technology. I think the other factor that's going to kick in, possibly, depending on what happens in the next week or 10 days of the Israel-Iran attacks, you might get digital cyber attacks. You might get unconventional warfare. You might get already the Israelis and the Iranians are attacking civilian infrastructure on both sides. But I think an important point here is what Hezbollah and Iran are fighting with Israel, or were fighting and are fighting because of what Israel is doing in the region. If Israel's policies were to evolve and become more law-abiding and accept to coexist with a self-determinant Palestinian state, which is what international agreements require, then the Arabs and the Iranians would not necessarily keep fighting Iran. And they've said that many, many times.
But that is not how things are unfolding. Okay, Thomas, let me ask you this scenario, because, and Fawad has said this as well, Israel effectively wants to bring down, or at the very least undermine, the Iranian regime. But they also wanted to undermine or bring down, absolutely, the PLO, when they thought the PLO was an existential threat to the state of Israel. That kind of ended up building, Hamas into an even greater force in Gaza. Is there the risk? Well, is there a risk, though, ultimately, that Israel could be creating a bigger enemy here?
Well, but wait a minute. Let's go back. At one time, the PLO was devoted to the destruction of the state of Israel, but then Yasser Arafat made peace with Israel, signed agreements on the South Lawn of the White House, and changed itself into the Palestinian Authority. There's still obviously a very strong nationalist movement in Palestine. We all know that. But it is possible for enemies to make peace. Look at Egypt and Israel. Look at Jordan and Israel. Look at the Abraham Accords. The question really comes down to whether Israel and Palestine can live in peace side by side with two separate states.
Okay, but we're talking now when we look at Iran and Israel. I want to keep it on this track. I mean, this is, again, my question is, in these offensives against Iran, against Hezbollah, all Iranian supported groups, could Israel potentially be creating a greater enemy that's so far we haven't seen?
The answer is no.
Okay.
The answer is right now, obviously, Israel is fighting a war against Hamas that Hamas is losing, and the people of Gaza, sadly, are also losing even more. In the case of Lebanon, as we were just discussing, Hezbollah's control over Lebanese politics was broken by its military defeat at the hands of Israel. Lebanon now has a new president. Lebanese politics is reining in some of Hezbollah's impulses, so that the back and forth attacks that we used to see are much, much smaller, fewer in number. And indeed, there's now an international military monitoring mechanism that's supposed to try to prevent them.
Okay.
So that's a very different world from what we were in before September.
Okay, Fawad, I'd like your opinion on that, as well as the question, we addressed this very briefly the other day, but diplomatically, who would or who could defend Iran if they've lost these kind of militia proxies, or whatever you'd like to call them? Tehran, for example, is already complaining that the G7 is blaming them for Israel's aggression. So is there someone diplomatically who will prove a better ally for Iran?
Of course, Iran's main friends, as Rami said, are the people of this region and internationally. So anyone that has been
But they can't
upset
appear
about
before the United Nations.
They cannot, but they are important. Iran's current government came to the popular revolution in 1979. Public opinion matters. And the people who were sick and tired of the genocide in Palestine are going to be sick and tired of the genocide that the Israelis and Americans are planning on Iran. That is very important. At the United Nations, just last week, we had Russia, China supporting Iran. At the IAEA, Russia and China voted against the resolution that was presented. Chinese, I think, realized that if Americans are successful with their mayhem in Iran, China could be next. They realized that all Persian Gulf countries are in line with U.S. foreign policy, with the exception of Iran. And I don't think they want the last country that is withstanding American hegemony, that they don't want that country to fall.
Rami,
so overall,
go ahead.
Overall, I think Iran's foreign policy has been independent. So Iran has friends, but Iran will be able to take care of itself because of the nature of the enemy that Iran has. They attacked a television station yesterday in Iran. Indeed. It's like, if we don't like the TRT coverage, we don't get to kill you.
Okay.
But that's what they're doing.
Let me ask, Rami, we only have a few minutes left, and I'd like to get both you and Thomas. We mentioned Russia. Some have actually mentioned that they believe this is an effort as well to destroy Moscow's only ally in the region. So how do you think, how much, I should say, does Moscow, does harming Iran actually harm Russia in turn?
Well, it might have some impact on energy issues, nuclear cooperation, economic flows. The Russians are trying, then the Chinese are both trying to create wider, let's say, relationships, alliances, maybe, certainly economic links with people all across the Middle East. But the Russians are pretty tied up in Ukraine for now. And neither Russia nor China are going to come in and fight for Iran, though they will provide it with technical assistance if it requires it. I think the point that Fuad made is very important, which is ultimately the public opinion, not only in the Middle East but all over the world, will ultimately determine what happens. And this is the reality across the Middle East. The Middle East is weak. Most of the Middle Eastern countries, Turkey and Iran were two exceptions. But the Arab countries are all weak and they're indecisive. So there's not going to be any major change in the strategic balance based on the abilities of the armies. But if you go back to Vietnam and Afghanistan and Iraq and Algeria, many other places, you'll find where overwhelming force by Western powers ultimately was defeated by the will of the people and resistance groups. So we shouldn't judge these things in terms of what's going on this week or next week. The fundamental point, again, is can the Arabs and the Israelis, Palestinian Israelis, coexist? Iran got involved because of Palestine, and Palestine was is subjugated by Israel. We need to resolve that conflict equitably for both sides.
Okay, Thomas, I mean, is Rami right in that it's far too soon to judge, or do you see the dominoes really starting to fall among Iran's allies completely? To what end? We don't know, maybe.
Well, but China is looking at both Iran and Saudi Arabia as giant petrol stations. It needs 8 or 9 million barrels of oil a day on a slow day. And the last thing it wants to see is Iran cutting off oil exports through the Straits of Hormuz. Russia, as Rami said, is deeply embroiled in its own war with Ukraine. It can't provide more than insignificant help to Iran militarily. The other thing, I know Fuad won't agree with this, but I have to point out that the Iranian government is deeply unpopular with the mass of the Iranian people. Demonstrations are prevented only by the Basij and the Revolutionary Guards actively suppressing dissent. And the Iranian government, although it has tried to make itself color revolution proof, is fully aware that the people want a government that is actually at peace with the world. And that's the biggest popular movement I think we need to keep in mind here.
Okay, Fouad, we do know you disagree. Unfortunately, we're completely out of time. We'll be following, as you know, up with this story again very soon. There's so many more angles to cover, but unfortunately, we're going to have to leave it there for this edition. So I'd like to thank all three of you sincerely so much for being with me. Our viewers, of course, for joining us as well. Remember, you can follow us on social media, and do be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel. I'm Andrea Sankey. We'll see you next time.